Before anyone tells you that one photograph couldn't change two lives, ask yourself this. Why would a young German woman walk toward armed American soldiers carrying something she could have hidden forever? Why would a battle-hardened soldier freeze at the sight of an ordinary piece of paper? And why would men who had learned never to trust the enemy suddenly fall silent without a single command? The answer wasn't written on the photograph. It was written in the choice behind it. Sometimes history doesn't turn because of a victory. Sometimes it turns because one person refuses to keep what never belonged to them. By the time the sun climbed above the shattered rooftops, that choice had already begun to change lives that would never meet again. The morning air carried the smell of damp brick and burned timber as Anna Keller picked her way through a street where every careful step stirred pale dust into the light. Broken windows reflected a quiet sky that no longer echoed with sirens, only the distant rumble of trucks and the soft tapping of loose stones beneath worn shoes. Near the edge of the sidewalk, half buried beneath cracked masonry, something dark caught her eye. It was a weathered leather wallet, soaked by spring rain and pressed beneath a fallen beam. There was no money inside, no military papers, only a single photograph, its edges curled with moisture, showing a smiling family standing on the porch of a white farmhouse, their faces untouched by the war that had carried the picture thousands of miles from home. Anna turned the photograph over with careful fingers, afraid that even the smallest movement might erase whatever story it still carried. The paper was worn thin, softened by rain and time, yet the faces remained clear enough to recognize joy. A woman stood beside a tall man in work clothes, while two young children smiled at the camera as though the world had never heard of war. Along the bottom edge, written in fading blue ink, was a single name: Private Daniel Carter, Columbus, Ohio. She whispered the words once, quietly, testing the unfamiliar rhythm of them before slipping the photograph back into the wallet. Around her, neighbors gathered bricks, searched for usable wood, and traded silent nods instead of conversations. One elderly woman noticed the wallet and lowered her voice. "If it belongs to an American, leave it where you found it." Another shook his head. "Or keep it. Nobody would ever know." Anna looked down again. She remembered the framed family portrait that had once rested on the piano in her parents' living room before the house disappeared into dust and smoke. No stranger could return that photograph now, but perhaps someone else still had the chance to see home again. She closed the wallet gently, tucked it inside her coat, and began walking toward the nearest American checkpoint with slow, steady steps that surprised even her. The road to the checkpoint felt longer than it looked. Every few yards, Anna questioned whether she should turn back, not because she feared punishment, but because she wondered if a stranger would even believe her intentions. American trucks rolled slowly past piles of broken brick, their engines humming with quiet purpose. Soldiers unloaded crates, exchanged brief words, and continued working without looking twice at the young woman walking alone with both hands visible. She noticed how different reality felt from the stories she had grown up hearing. There were no shouted threats, no dramatic confrontations, only tired men carrying out another day's duties beneath a pale spring sky. The closer she came, the more carefully she held the wallet inside her coat, protecting it from the cool breeze as though it belonged to someone in her own family. At the entrance to the checkpoint, a young military policeman stepped forward and raised one hand politely. His expression remained cautious, but not hostile. In careful English, Anna asked if anyone knew a soldier named Private Daniel Carter from Ohio. The guard studied her for a quiet moment, surprised less by her question than by the calm certainty in her voice. Without another word, he nodded once, disappeared between the parked vehicles, and left Anna standing alone, listening to the distant flutter of an American flag moving gently above the camp. Several minutes passed before a man emerged from between two olive-drab trucks, wiping dust from his hands with a folded cloth. He looked no older than 30, his uniform faded by months of travel, his boots carrying the pale dirt of roads that stretched across countries neither of them had imagined visiting before the war. His eyes settled on Anna with quiet confusion, then drifted toward the worn wallet she held with both hands. He offered a cautious smile, the kind reserved for uncertain moments. "I am Daniel Carter," he said slowly. "Can I help you?" Anna hesitated for only a heartbeat. She reached into her coat, and placed the wallet gently into his open palm without asking for anything in return. At first, he appeared puzzled, expecting perhaps a request for food, medicine, or directions. Instead, he opened the weathered leather, and the photograph slipped into view. His breathing stopped for a moment. The color seemed to leave his face as his thumb traced the familiar edges of the picture. Around them, conversations faded into the background. The nearby soldiers noticed the sudden silence and glanced toward Daniel, unsure what had changed. He stared at the smiling faces in the photograph, then looked back at Anna with disbelief that words could not quite reach. The question remained in his eyes long before he finally found the voice to ask it. "Where did you find this?" Anna pointed toward the narrow street, where broken bricks still covered the sidewalk. "Near the old church," she answered softly. "It was beneath a piece of wood. I thought the rain would ruin it if I left it there." Daniel lowered his eyes to the photograph again. The corners were bent, but every familiar face remained. His mother stood with one hand resting on his father's shoulder. His younger sister held the family dog by its collar, smiling into a future none of them could have imagined. He released a slow breath that sounded almost like relief. "I lost this 3 weeks ago," he said quietly. "I searched everywhere." Anna simply nodded. She did not mention how many people had told her to keep it or throw it away. That part no longer mattered. Daniel looked at her with genuine confusion. "You walked all the way here just to return it?" She met his eyes without hesitation. "Someone would want my family's photograph returned too." The words settled over the checkpoint with unexpected weight. No speech followed. No dramatic gesture. Even the soldiers standing nearby remained silent, watching a conversation that somehow felt larger than either person speaking. Daniel carefully slipped the photograph back into the wallet as though it had become fragile glass. For the first time in many months, the object in his hands no longer reminded him of everything the war had taken. It reminded him that decency had somehow survived it. Anna thanked him with a small nod and turned to leave before Daniel could say another word. She had not come expecting gratitude. The return of the wallet had completed the only promise she had made to herself. As she walked away, the sound of boots on packed dirt blended with the steady hum of trucks and distant voices, but something around the checkpoint had quietly shifted. One of the soldiers watched her disappear down the road and asked Daniel, "You did not know her?" Daniel shook his head slowly, still holding the wallet. "No, she did not owe me anything." The answer lingered longer than either man expected. Over the following days, Anna noticed subtle changes she had never anticipated. The guards at the checkpoint greeted her with polite nods instead of wary stares. A young medic smiled and stepped aside so she could pass through the crowded street without interruption. Nobody treated her as a curiosity or an enemy. They simply treated her as Anna. Daniel carried the photograph in the breast pocket of his uniform from that day forward. Every evening before the light faded, he unfolded it for a quiet moment, not only to remember the family waiting across the ocean, but also to remember the stranger who had reminded him that character could survive even when cities could not. Respect had not been demanded. It had been earned in complete silence. Daniel never spoke about the wallet during official reports, and he never told the story as though someone owed him sympathy. Instead, he quietly asked a logistics officer one simple question. "There is a family on Linden Street. Are they receiving their weekly food ration?" The officer checked a clipboard, frowned, and admitted that several homes in that neighborhood had been overlooked after recent population records changed. Daniel said nothing more. He simply volunteered to help deliver the next shipment himself. 2 mornings later, an army truck rolled slowly into Anna's neighborhood carrying flour, canned vegetables, powdered milk, soap, and blankets intended for dozens of families, not just one. Daniel made certain every household on the list received exactly the same fair allotment before the truck moved on. When he finally reached Anna's door, he handed her the package with the same quiet professionalism he had shown every other resident. There was no special favor and no private reward. Anna understood immediately. He had not come to repay kindness with kindness. He had come to make certain fairness reached everyone it was meant to reach. As the truck pulled away, children waved from broken doorways while older neighbors stood watching in thoughtful silence. Sometimes gratitude did not arrive wrapped in gifts. Sometimes it arrived disguised as simple justice, carried one careful delivery at a time. The weeks passed almost unnoticed, measured not by calendars, but by the lengthening evenings and the sound of birds returning to trees that had stood quietly through the hardest seasons. Then one cool morning, word spread through the neighborhood that an American transportation unit would be leaving before sunrise. Anna walked to the roadside without knowing exactly why. Trucks lined up one behind another, engines idling softly beneath a sky painted with pale gold. Daniel stepped down from the last vehicle carrying a small envelope in one hand. "I wanted you to have this," he said. Inside was a new photograph, taken only days before. It showed the men in his unit standing shoulder to shoulder, tired but smiling, their uniforms dusty, their faces brighter than the road behind them. On the back, written in careful handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for bringing home something that mattered." Anna looked at the photograph for a long moment before carefully folding it into the same inside pocket where she had once carried his wallet. She reached into her coat and removed a simple pencil she had been using to keep a small notebook of daily thoughts. Daniel smiled and gently closed her hand around it. "Keep writing," he said. "Some stories deserve to outlive the people who lived them." Neither of them said goodbye. They only exchanged one final nod before the convoy rolled slowly toward the horizon. More than 30 years later, on a quiet autumn afternoon in Columbus, Ohio, Daniel Carter sat beside the same front porch that appeared in the faded family photograph. His hair had turned silver, his hands carried the slow movements of age, but one habit had never changed. Every October, he opened an old wooden album and carefully turned each page as though every memory deserved the same patience that had once returned it to him. His grandson noticed two photographs resting side by side. One showed the smiling family from long ago. The other showed a dusty group of young soldiers standing beneath a foreign sky. Between them rested a small sheet of paper, worn at the folds from decades of careful handling. The boy asked why those pictures always stayed together. Daniel smiled quietly before answering. "Because one reminds me where I came from. The other reminds me who helped me remember." On the back of the newer photograph, beneath his own handwriting, another sentence had been added years later. It read, "She returned more than a photograph. She returned my faith in people." Outside, the afternoon breeze stirred the trees exactly as it had on countless ordinary days. History would remember battles, generals, and treaties. Daniel remembered a young woman who chose honesty when no one was watching. She never raised her voice. She never asked for recognition. Yet one quiet act of dignity traveled farther than any army ever could, proving that even after the darkest chapters, humanity could still find its way home.